If you're like me, there is a universal fact. There is a great evil out there, and it's called IKEA furniture, all right? Anybody in here ever, walked through the trial of trying to build IKEA furniture? And just show of hands here. I can tell because some of you are missing fingers. That's how you know. No, there is something universally dumb about dealing with IKEA things. I mean, number one, you're trying to build something that you don't know the name for, a sklurg or a blorkin or whatever these things are called. Then when you open up the package, you're not allowed to use real tools, but to use an Allen wrench that's far too short for what you need and will make you take 3 times as long as you need to get things done. But if that weren't enough, if you're like me, by the time you hit the 4th step with no words and direction on how to do it, you've realized that, hey, I've been doing this backwards, and I've built this entire shelf wrong. Now, if you're like me, and unfortunately I perceive that you are, you will understand that emotion of unchecked rage. Often when it comes to building furniture, this is the point where I strip the bolt or strip the screw or kick the thing or just tell Adrian, you deal with whatever this thing is supposed to be, and I walk outside and vent a little bit. But there is something universal about rage or anger when we face things that are frustrating or are difficult or are disappointing to us. And yet, when we consider our Christian lives, the role of anger is not often talked about. We don't normally deal with, what am I supposed to do when I approach and feel this anger, whether I've been betrayed, whether I've been disappointed, whether I've been hurt. No matter how calm a person you are, there will be points where you'll experience anger. And today we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 25 as we look into David's story and see how this man after God's heart dealt with anger. So as you're turning there in your Bibles where you are, we'll also have the scripture up on the screen. But I want to give a little bit of context to where we are in the story. As you know from the sermon last week, Nathan talked about the life from the cave and dealing with David not killing Saul when he had the opportunity. The reality is, but after this, even after making a great decision not to kill Saul, he's still in exile. He's still in the desert. And then when you look at verse 1 of chapter 25, we see something very major that happens in the life of David. It says that Samuel, his mentor, the prophet of Israel, the judge, the one who anointed David to be king, is dead. This man who was really the last possible way that perhaps Saul could get himself under control is now gone. With that happening, David retreats even further into the wilderness. The scholars believe that he had gone into what was the Sinai desert. He went out as far as he possibly could. And so as we're getting into this point in the story, I hope you can imagine David's emotions. The disappointment layered over disappointment, the fact that he was trying to make good decisions. He was trying to protect his countrymen. He was trying to do the right thing. He was the anointed one of God to be the king of Israel, and he was sleeping in a cave, living in the desert, pursued by his king, and his mentor is now dead. There's a lot of emotion happening here. Now we'll enter into the story where we deal with a man named Nabal. Now, it's funny, when we get into this part of the story, this man named Nabal, who is a distant cousin of David's, David is confronted with a man whose name literally means fool, all right? So, we're on a good path here when you're dealing with somebody whose middle name is idiot. Nabal was a wealthy man, distantly related to David, and David, when he was in exile, had actively helped protect his sheep herders, his workers, from bandits that lived in the desert. And so David, as he gets into this point of desperation, this place of fatigue, comes to Nabal and during a feast day, during a time when Nabal will be eating, he'll have lots of food and stuff around, and just says, hey, can you share a little bit with us? We're living out in the literal desert. It would be nice to get a little something, a little bit of food, a little bit of water to help us along. Let's see then, starting in verse 9, what Nabal's response was. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" Clearly he knows who the son of Jesse is, or else he wouldn't know what his dad's name was. "There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who will come from I don't know where? That's not a response I would have expected, would you? To somebody who said, hey, look, we're out in the desert, we're helping your people, we want to be able to help you. Nabal not only says no, not only says, there's not really enough here to take care of us, because clearly there was, but he also goes beyond on a tirade about kids these days, right? You see that in there where he says, all these people are leaving their masters, they're breaking away, and then he goes on this entitled tirade of all the things he's done to build this up for himself. And he says, why should I give anything to you? I owe you nothing, and so I'm not going to give you anything. In the culture of the Bible, a response like this, when someone is asking for hospitality, to say, no, I'm not going to give you anything, is not only rude, but it's also just stupid. It was a dumb thing to do. And not only that, but the fact that David and his group were a group of heavily armed renegade soldiers. They come to your door and say, can I have a cup of water? Probably best to say, yeah, sure, I can scare up something for you. But Nabal, if we're looking at the development, the deep, complex development of his character, he's just a jerk. And this is our first point today, that even in our lives, when we try to produce peace, when we try to build bridges, when we try to go above and beyond to help people, the reality is sometimes people are just jerks. We live in a fallen world, and one of the things of our fallen world is that people are capable and also oftentimes willing and excited to practice moral evil. Oftentimes when I'm counseling people, I come across discouragement and confusion because of a friend who has betrayed them, or a boss that's mistreating them, or a person who just encounters general unkindness in the world. And because of the sin in the world, moral evil exists, even despite our best intentions. And if you would challenge that, I would challenge you to go drive on I-35 for about 7 minutes and see what kind of moral evil exists out in our world. You can drive, be the best driver, stick at the speed limit, look in all your mirrors, and someone's still going to give you a California hello while you're on Mopac or on I-35. But the reason I highlight this is because I think sometimes we approach the world, we approach the ethics with the way that we interact with the world in such a way that we say, if I make the right decisions, if I do good things, then people will always respond to me in a positive way. We come at it with that idealism, but whenever we are faced with the reality of men like Nabal in the world, people who are just jerks, what happens in us is that we start to say, well, I tried being nice and doing the good thing. Now because I've been mistreated, that gives me the right to mistreat others. See, I carry my ethics in high regard. I live my life in good righteousness until I start getting bad kickback on me, or somebody responds the wrong way. Sometimes we justify our bad behavior at work or with our spouse or with our teachers based on the jerks around us. One of the things that this passage is going to remind us is that regardless of the way that people act in their lives around you, regardless of the morals and the ethics and the general attitude that people have around you, you as believers are called to righteousness. You are called to a higher standard that is beyond the response of moral evil in the world. That whether people will appreciate you or not, you are called to live lives of righteousness in spite of them, okay? Not because of, but in spite of. So now, let's see how David responds. Nabal has basically slapped him in the face, has hit him kicked him while he's down. Let's see what kind of a calm response David has. Verse 13. Hearing this, David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. Now, I know that most of you in this room don't read ancient Hebrew, and so I'm going to translate this into Texan for you. David loaded his gun. He was ready to go. He said, you know what? I have had enough of this. I am armed. I am ready. I've got a group of military force around me, and this idiot has now said something stupid to me and said fighting words to me. I'm going to give him what he deserves. He puts on his sword. He gets his group of renegades ready. They are ready to go. They are ready for blood. And let me be clear. I think when we look at the story sometimes, we say, well, maybe Nabal wasn't, maybe he was just having a bad day or something. There is nothing that justifies Nabal's response to David. It was wrong. It was cruel, and it was very ill-timely. And in my words, he's unequivocally a moron. But David does not abide fools, and already in mourning for the death of his mentor Samuel and his fatigue and his desperation of living in the desert, he's had enough. He sets up his warriors to strike back at this jerk, which brings us to our second truth today. When wronged, it is natural and not sinful to feel anger. See, this is where anger enters into the system. David, in a very real way, was wronged by a man who had no reason to wrong him. David had done everything that he needed to do to take care of him, and this guy made a stupid decision to hit him back. I remember I watched a show this one time where a guy was walking in his house and steps on a nail, and his response is, oh, fiddly-dee, now I think I need a tetanus shot, right? Is that a natural response to stepping on a nail? No, absolutely not. All of us in this room, when we feel hurt or pain or surprise or ill treatment, you have to know it's natural in your humanity, in the way God created you, to experience and feel anger. Anger has a natural purpose. There are many who are probably here who sometimes feel guilty when they first experience anger. We're all church people, right? We grew up worshiping Christ. That is in the children's Bible where he's has a lamb on his shoulder and he's, playing with a bunch of little babies and stuff like that. And Jesus would never be angry, right? A good Christian could never experience anger, right? So there's this tension here where we have this natural emotion that is anger, that is God designed, is given to us for a reason, but we often face guilt for feeling it. I especially find this to be the case when I talk to people who've been the victims of abuse, where a lot of times they will find themselves, after chronically being put down and hurt and mistreated, and getting to the point where they say, I guess I just deserve this. Because of the ill treatment that I'm receiving, I don't deserve to be angry. I guess this is who I am. I guess this is what I deserve. Hear this, friends. Anger at mistreatment or pain is a God-given response and emotion to move us to righteousness, to move us to justice. We are wired to respond to injustice and pain with anger, and usually that emotion is necessary to move us forward. What it does is it fuels movement. In our lives, if you never get angry about anything, if you never feel that emotion of anger, why would you ever move from an unsatisfactory situation to a satisfactory one? Really, what anger is for us, the way God designs it is as kind of like lighter fluid for charcoal. It's something that starts a fire. It starts a movement. It starts something positive. Anger is designed to move us. Now, where does it start to get out of control? See this in Ephesians 4:26-27, which says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity for the devil. See, what happens is sometimes we say, well, I don't have the right to be angry. I shouldn't be angry. And we layer our response to that, and we push it down, and we repress it. Then we come on to other circumstances, and we experience anger, but we don't want to acknowledge it, so we layer another layer on it. And then we do it again, and then we do it again, and then we do it again. And all the time we're saying, I'm just being a humble and meek Christian. I'm not going to respond with anger. I'm just going to let this go until we finally have had enough. And like David, we pull our gun. See, I think about this like an experience I had when I was in Laredo, Texas. I was with a group of friends there on a mission trip, and we decided one day that we were going to grill burgers out at a public park. And if you've ever grilled at a public park, the grills are disgusting, right? You're going to have full chunks of like chicken and burnt stuff all over it. So in my wisdom, I said, hey, let's put down some foil on this to keep it clean. This will be good. We'll make burgers. Everybody will be clean. No one's going to get tetanus. This is going to be awesome. And so we put the burgers out on this foil, and it's all going well. The problem is, if you've ever grilled burgers like that, you don't realize that you start to get a grease puddle that builds up on your tin foil. So as we were cooking, I handed off the spatula to one of my other friends and walked away, and he went over there and started poking at it. He accidentally pokes a hole in the tinfoil. The grease drains through all at one time and basically shoots 20 feet up in the air in a grease fire and taking a good amount of his arm hair off at the same time. This is like unresolved anger. This is like unresolved rage. That a little, like the burger grease, a little bit of grease tastes good. But when you let it layer and build and build and build, eventually, when the anger hits the fire, it has unintended consequences. There is an explosion that happens. And oftentimes, people who don't deserve it are the ones who get hurt by it. So in this story, we have David ready to go, armed to the teeth, 400 guys ready to go. And with this, it's important also not to miss this. David doesn't say, I'm going to go just punish Nabal. He says, I'm going to go kill everyone in his family. All right? And this is kind of the ancient Near Eastern way of insult. If you insult me, then I'm going to come at you with a hammer. I'm going to kill everybody. And so David is locked and loaded. What does resolution look like? How do we get out of this situation of unchecked rage? Let's read verses 24 through 26 and verses 30 through 31. Starting in verse 24, it says, And Abigail, Nabal's wife, came and fell at David's feet and said, On me alone, O my Lord, be the guilt. Let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord that you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And move on to verse 30. And when the Lord has done to my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. At this point in the story, we enter into it Nabal's wife, a woman named Abigail, whose name literally means her father's pride, her father's joy. You know, what the story makes it clear to say is that while Nabal was an idiot, his wife was a very wise and level-headed and brave woman. She sees what's coming. She understands what David is bringing along with him, and she puts herself out on the line to go and resolve it. And don't miss this. This is an unarmed woman going out to a very armed and very angry force of desert troops and begging for mercy to them. The end result of this is not guaranteed for Abigail. This is a very, very, very dangerous situation for her. And as someone who is connected to Nabal, she also is within the target. She puts herself at real risk to protect the innocents and to make this right. So why does she do this? Why does she do it this way? It brings our third point, that peacemakers go above and beyond to spare the most people. Abigail wasn't just trying to save her own skin or to try to make everybody happy. She speaks the clear truth of Nabal's wrong. She says in the context of this plea to David of please don't kill all these people, she says, look, he made a mistake. He's a dumb guy. He made a very real mistake. But what she does is she seeks the preservation of her people, and she seeks the good of her enemy as well. And in this case, she says to David, look, if you do this, you're going to carry the blood guiltiness of killing your own cousins and innocent family members for the rest of your life. We recognize that you're going to be king. Is this something you want to bear for the remainder of your life and your rule? You know that if you make the right decision here, God will step in and will deal with the situation for you. Don't make this worse. Don't try to work your own salvation through it. See, often we take the problematic view that peacemaking is achieved through people pleasing. See, we think, okay, in order to make peace in the situation, I just need to go make everybody happy. Do you know who often is in a situation where a peacemaker is trying to make everybody happy, who the collateral damage is, the person who actually receives the hurt from that? It's the peacemaker. That oftentimes when you go out and you try to please people, you don't bring peace, but what you do is you open up room for corruption, you open up room for sin to grow. Peacemaking requires us to speak truth into the situation, not to justify wrong behavior to make people happy. Abigail isn't interested in appeasing anyone. She is speaking the truth in love and making peace. And she understands the biblical truth of James 1:20, which says, "The anger of man does not produce the justice of God." In this case, she knew that David was out for mutual destruction. How is that justice? And this is where unchecked anger usually takes us. We hurt, therefore we hurt others, and then experience the guilt of that. I like the quote that was attributed to Confucius, where he said, "Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves." See, oftentimes what happens is we think we have the right, we have the justification to hurt these people who hurt us without thinking about what's going to happen next. In order for us to be peacemakers, we have to go above and beyond just trying to make everybody happy, to speak truth into situations. And know this too, avoidance without attempts at resolution can be equally destructive. Abigail had the opportunity. She could have just taken off. She apparently had camels, so she could have ridden off into the desert, let whatever was going to happen to Nabal happen, and then be done with it. In our lives, sometimes we think, okay, in order to make peace with this person that I have a broken relationship, I just should avoid them. They make me mad. And when I get mad, I do things that I don't like. And so the best way to be a peacemaker is just not to deal with it. You recognize that avoidance just brings festering of the problem. As we avoid things, we justify untruths. We justify things that hurt, that are being done. And instead of building resolution, of actually dealing with the problem, we have anger layer over layer over layer, and somebody is going to pay for it. If we are going to be people after God's heart, we're going to be not just peace seekers, but peacemakers that seek to create resolution in places of pain and hurt. So Abigail's laid herself out for this. What's going to happen? How is David, who is armed to the teeth, ready to go, how is he going to respond? Let's read verses 32 through 35. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand and what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." David sees that Abigail is right, and he checks his anger. He knows that he's been wronged, but he knows that there is a greater wrong in what he's doing of going to murder this entire family. Abigail has spoken the truth to him that it would haunt him forever and that would be a hindrance in his future kingdom. And he actually praises God for her help and sends her away in peace. And this guy who would be the king of Israel, it says he obeyed her voice of this unarmed, defenseless woman who came to him with truth. This brings us to our last main point today. We have to understand that your first reaction doesn't have to be your last reaction. Often when we find ourselves in rage about something, we feel compelled to carry it out. This compulsion is really usually driven by a hurt pride. We often justify sin by the excuse of the wrong that's been done to us. And this anger that was designed to move us instead becomes a burden. We think that sometimes because we react in anger to something, because we, like for instance, say some things that we don't really mean, make some decisions that we didn't really want to do, that's the end of the story, and that all of my future actions have to fall in line with that because I have to stand my ground. One of the things that makes David a man after God's heart is his willingness to check his anger, that when he sees something that would become sin, to stop and repent of it. I think about the process with rocket boosters. I don't know if as a kid, I used to see these rockets that were going into space and think, man, that's such a big thing. But then when I would see the videos of it, of the rocket booster separating off and just flying off into space, and the actual capsule only being this big, it's like, wow, that's weird. It seems like that the big piece should go along with it. A rocket booster is designed to power the thing into space. A satellite or a space shuttle is not designed to carry the weight of that burden forever. That once anger is experienced, it is designed to be let go. And if you in your life continue to hold on to anger as an ongoing fuel source, as an ongoing push that makes you motivated, that chip on your shoulder to be able to succeed in life, you are carrying a burden that you shouldn't be carrying. And it is going to be a burden that weighs you down from what God calls you to be and to do. Peacemakers and the righteous understand that we must get beyond the anger to get to good. And this is the natural progression of how grace works with anger. We experience anger, we confront truth, we make the right action or forgive, and then find peace. Anger starts it, but it cannot end it. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a continued destructive cycle. And my theory of why David is called a man after God's own heart is not because he's the best guy, and he makes a lot of mistakes, and we see that even at the end of this passage where he makes some mistakes. Why I think David is called a man after God's heart is because he understands the nature of what God's grace is. He loves God's law. Whenever he is confronted with his wrongdoing, he repents of it, he turns, he changes, and he sets his heart in the will of God for the long run. And when we try to be these people who are after God's heart, do we represent real grace in the way that we live? Or do we fall into the old patterns of, I've been wronged, so now I deserve to wrong somebody else? You can see that one leads to life, the other to destruction. So David repents and does the right thing. How does the story end? Does Nabal get away with it? And does this guy make it long term? Well, I'll summarize it for you a little bit. When Abigail gets back, Nabal is feasting like an idiot. Again, he had told David, no, I'm not giving you anything that I've earned, as if he couldn't afford it. But he's sitting there feasting, and it says that literally he's drunk whenever Abigail comes back. In the morning, then, Abigail tells him what she's done, told him, basically, I fixed your problem for you, and you would have been a dead man. Because of the fear that Nabal feels upon recognition of the stupid act that he's done, it says that he's struck with a stroke, that his heart becomes a stone in him, and for 10 days, nothing. There was no emotion. And then it says at the end of that 10 days, the Lord struck him again, and he died. Vengeance, at the end of the day, was the Lord's. Yeah, Nabal was evil. Nabal was hurtful and crass and a fool. And he received the due justice for the actions that he had done. But for David and for Abigail, they escaped that. They made peace. They made a way forward. At the end of the story, Abigail marries David and becomes a queen in exile. Out of all of the probable outcomes of this story, if we were to read this story in today's news, this one is probably the most unlikely, but it is the one that is the best. It's the best acting out of grace in the context of anger. So what about for us? It's all well and good for David in the story, but how should my heart move in its present state? You know, we're confronted daily by the pride and sin of man around us. Our hearts often hurt from the injustice that we see over and over again. What am I supposed to do with this anger that I have that things in the world are not right? And some people will look at Jesus' words from Matthew 5:39 and say, okay, here's the answer, where he says, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, one thing we don't have time to talk about today is the role of Christian self-defense and how that works out. But hey, as luck would have it, that'll be on our podcast this week, so feel free to tune in on that. But one thing I want to say about this verse and about why Jesus says this is not a not life-threatening situation he's talking about. This is a situation of humiliation, that if somebody was coming to you and wanted to humiliate you, wanted to shame you, wanted to put you down in the eyes of others around you, you would go and you would slap them with the back of your hand in public. What Jesus is saying in the context of this is not to be driven by pride and to strike back, which, you have full rights to do in the law. Jesus' instruction is to stand on the ground of grace and not to be compelled to do evil. When we react out of anger because we're hurt, we sometimes will cloak an action of evil, of doing pain and destruction back to somebody else, as good because we're hurt. We are called to go above and beyond in making peace and driving grace. I like the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. when he said in a sermon, "Never succumb to the temptation of becoming bitter. As you press on for justice, make sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the weapon of love. Let no man pull you so low as to hate him. Always avoid violence. If you succumb to the temptation of using violence in your struggle, unborn generations will be recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. And your chief legacy of the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos." You know, most gravestones you'll see in cemeteries mark the good things that people did for others. Very rarely is a person's legacy that they want to remember, I showed them. I taught them a lesson. Friends, the most memorable and valiant things that you're going to do in your life are the ways that you love in spite of the evil of the world. All of us face pain, face hurt, face disappointment, face surprise, face misfortune. Anger is a universal thing in our world, and we watch over and over and over again as people strike back at those that they say have stricken them. And the only outlier is never peace, but more and more destruction. That happens on a political level. It happens on a personal level. Where many of you in this room have broken relationships, where you've experienced hurt or abuse or pain or disappointment. And in your mind and in your heart, you're dragged down to that level where you say, I'm going to get mine against that person. Friends, there is no peace in that. Some in this room will have had chronic experiences of this kind of pain and have layered years upon years of anger and hurt, saying, God couldn't possibly want me to feel anger about this. I must deserve it. You don't. You don't. While pain is universal, it is not necessarily deserved. God gives us righteous anger to move forward, to grow, to be the kind of people that He's called us to be people after His own heart, but not to carry that burden forever. Here in a moment, we're going to have our invitation, as we do every week. I'm going to go ahead and have Garrett come on up to the stage. As always, we offer you the opportunity that if your relationship with God is broken, if you have never had that experience of peace in His grace, that a member of our staff would love to pray with you about what it would look like to accept Christ or to join this faith family. But what I want to tell you today is that maybe now is the time for you to raise your heart up to the Lord and say, God, I am just so angry at this person in my life. God, I am so angry at this situation in my life. Or maybe even, God, I'm so angry at you for this situation I face. Do you know that until you lift it up to the Lord, it is an idol that you'll hold close to your chest? It'll be a burden that slows you down and keeps you from walking the path as a man or a woman after God's heart. He desires you to be people free. He desires you to be people of grace. He desires you to be people of peace. As He says in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." Let's be people that seek God's heart, check our anger, and make peace.